let's talk about this race in New York 16 and start. I mean, this is part of a bigger phenomenon because we know, and I think this audience is familiar with AIPAC and its derivatives, DMFI and the United, I can't remember, Clean Skies Initiative name that they've given themselves, are just pumping extraordinary amounts of Republican money. And the race that's coming up is this one in 2 weeks in New York 16th Congressional District in particular. Jamaal Bowman facing basically Congress's next Joe Manchin, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, this guy is not just not progressive, but he's to the right of Joe Biden.
Yeah, absolutely. It is wild to see how much AIPAC is actually pouring into this district. It is at this point going to be more money than they've ever spent in a congressional primary. Right now they're at $13 million. And like you said, it's overwhelmingly, Republican money. Political story that came out this past weekend kind of showed that AIPAC is now the single largest source of Republican donor spending going into Democratic primaries. And they're doing it from all sides. That's just the money that, they bundled nearly $2 million for George Latimer. About half of that money has come from donors who give to Republicans. Then you have the United Democracy Project, their super PAC that they launched last cycle. 9 of the top 10 mega donors to that super PAC are Republican billionaires or Trump mega donors. You're talking about Bernie Marcus and Jan Koum and Paul Singer and Robert Kraft. And so what we are seeing really with AIPAC is exposing themselves for the deeply right-wing lobby that they are. And it's not just about Israel. It's not just about that Jamaal Bowman is one of the greatest champions of Palestinian rights in a ceasefire in Congress, but it's also that, these are billionaires at the end of the day whose profits and bottom lines are harmed by people like Jamaal Bowman, who are calling for a Green New Deal and are calling for taxes on billionaires. And then you have George Latimer, who, like you said, is truly trying to be the Joe Manchin of the House of Representatives, who, at this point, he's been asked 3 different times, hey, will you repeal Trump's tax cuts for billionaires and raise taxes on billionaires like Joe Biden supports? And he's like, no, 3 different occasions, and he can't do that. And you also see just how far to the right he is on Israel and Gaza, even for this district. Nearly 70% of this district supports a ceasefire, yet George Latimer has said nothing, and he can't even, say what Chuck Schumer has been willing to say, which is Netanyahu is a problem. And he's like, nope. So it is a historic amount of spending that's happening in this election, and it's a crisis not only for progressives in the future of our movement, but also for democracy. I don't think anyone wants to see 12 mail pieces in their mailbox every day and 10 ads every 30 minutes saying X, Y, and Z, and definitely not saying anything about Israel.
And I should say, you're not exaggerating in terms of those mailers and these ads. Like I have been struggling to think of another primary that I can remember where there's been A, this much money dumped into it, and B, the money so one-sided. I can't think of it specifically, but the idea of like 2 big fundraisers going at it, I feel like we've seen. But I don't recall a primary, and this is a blue district. There's really no chance of a Republican winning in this district. I can't recall this amount of one-sided spending, and particularly against an incumbent, a 2-term incumbent. It's a testament to Bowman not selling out in some respects, that he's not able to garner, but this is like, what is the spending? Do we even have like a notion of what is something like, it feels like it's 20-1 right now, if maybe more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not a fair fight. And it can't be a fair fight when you have, progressive grassroots movement versus Donald Trump's donors, right? It's never going to be that. We're up against the same people who are spending millions of dollars to prevent Joe Biden from entering the White House. And so obviously it's going to be disproportionate. And you're seeing that. And the purpose is not to just win an election. The purpose is to depress voters and decrease turnout and, just the opposite of what we need, what the Democratic Party should need come November, which is to turn out and engage young voters, progressive voters, Black and brown, and Democrats of color. And so AIPAC has kind of exposed itself once again that it's doing the bidding of, the Donald Trumps of the world. And it is a monumental amount of money that is being spent. AIPAC has never even spent this much money in a single Democratic primary, but we saw the previews of this even last cycle. Their super PAC didn't exist until last cycle, and they spent about $4 million in Summer Lee's primary, and Donna Edwards' primary, and Andy Levin's primary. And, we were on the ground in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, and we saw what that looked like. It was constant barrage of attack ads on television. Doesn't matter what you're watching, doesn't matter if it's a kid's show or if it's late night television, and you're getting like 10 mail pieces a day that put Summer Lee's face next to Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so it's often disinformation. It's often racist dog whistles, which we've seen George Latimer lean into happily.
I've been shocked by the things that he has said in terms of race, frankly. Yeah, and shocked that there's been that there has been no condemnation of what he's saying from someone like Hakeem Jeffries. I mean, I understand, I don't have any illusions about Hakeem Jeffries, but how do you, as the Democratic leader in the House, allow a candidate in this primary to come out and say that the reason why Jamaal Bowman got elected is because Black people had too much access to the ballot because it was mailed to them? I mean, this is really bad stuff.
Yeah, it's a dereliction of duty, I think, on a lot of people's parts here. The just sheer amount of from dog whistle to unmaskingly overt racism that George Latimer has peddled, and he has a long history of it. We all know, George Latimer compared people calling for Andrew Cuomo to resign over sexual harassment allegations to the lynching of Emmett Till. So it's not wholly unsurprising that this man has a lot of racist things he wants to say, and he's been doing it. And, he is actively echoing the right-wing talking points of his donors, going on Trump donor radio shows saying, mail ballots and Black voter turnout after George Floyd's murder skewed results for Jamaal Bowman. He has said that Jamaal Bowman's constituencies are in Dearborn, Michigan, which is obviously Islamophobic attack on him. And his supporters have called Jamaal a thug, have said that he should have a stroke, that he's a liar, and he has said nothing about it. Instead, what George Latimer always does is tokenizes Black people in this district and his supporters and says, well, you know what? I hired a deputy and he's Black, and I grew up in a Black housing area and I have Black friends. And it is mind-boggling that we have not seen more condemnation or demands that his supporters and his endorsers condemn the kind of deeply racist sentiments that are coming out of him. And it's clear that he is running to represent only one small part of this district, and he's willing to kind of just show that voters in the Bronx and Black and brown voters throughout Westchester County are disposable to him.
Are there lessons from Summer Lee's fight against this type of onslaught that Bowman has picked up and is deploying in some way? I mean, this seems to me to be a race that's just going to be, if Bowman can pull it out. And I know and we'll talk about this poll in a second, but if there's a chance that he can, sort of like stem this tide, because honestly, I have a lot of people I know who sadly watch the Yankees. I'm a Red Sox fan, but they can't watch a Yankees game without getting like 40 pro Latimer ads. I know people who live in that district, and they're like, my mailbox, like literally, and I don't know if people realize it, but particularly up in the Bronx, like your mailbox it's like a little square like this. It's not like a big, there's no door slot, and they're like, it's full every day with these mailers. What can they do? I mean, is it just a matter of like getting people out there and canvassing and making sure you get all your votes out?
Yeah, absolutely. It is overwhelming. And like I said, the goal of it is to depress voters, not to inspire them. And I think there's one thing that we learned from Summer's race that Jamaal and the campaign have been doing very well, which is, AIPAC runs a campaign of peddling disinformation and misinformation. And the greatest kind of tonic to that is to just expose the truth, right? And talk about the fact that the ads you're seeing on TV are funded by Donald Trump's mega donors and Republican billionaires. This PAC, AIPAC, endorses 109 Republicans who voted to overturn the election on January 6th. It endorses over 200 anti-choice Republicans who want to ban abortion. We talk a lot about our Democratic values being on the ballot in November, democracy and abortion rights, but they're on the ballot in every single one of these primaries, and they're going to be on the ballot in this primary on June 25th because that's who George Latimer has aligned himself with. It's deeply right-wing interests, and we can't match the amount of money that Republican mega donors have, but we are putting up all of our resources in this movement to protect Jamaal, but it's about turnout. This race is about ensuring that every voter in this district is not depressed by these attack ads and instead are inspired by Jamaal's vision for the future of New York 16 that they all support. A vision that, a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, universal child care. These are policies that are deeply popular within New York 16, and it's just about making sure that we go out and talk to voters one-on-one to make that message clear. And we're seeing that, obviously voters have these attack ads in their mind at the doors, and we hear that at the doors. And when we talk to them and explain these votes, explain what Jamaal has stood up for and what he's done with President Biden to deliver for this district, they understand that, and they understand that what they're seeing is disinformation. And so I think that's our path forward here.
And we should be clear that in terms of like the stakes outside of New York 16th, I mean, Jamaal Bowman's one of my favorite Congress people. And, I'm in New York State, and obviously, it's going to be a blue district. But the implication of this race nationally is that if Bowman can win this race, and I know they're coming after Cori Bush as well, but if they can win their races, it is a sign to other lawmakers that you don't have to be as intimidated by this huge onslaught of Republican money in a primary as you might otherwise be, because it's doable. You can win in these situations. I mean, that's the message that Summer Lee gave, and that's why this race is so important. And it works the other way, too. If they take out Bowman and or Cori Bush, they are basically signaling to other lawmakers, you don't want us to come after you, and they don't actually even have to deploy at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. AIPAC is desperate to make it seem like they've won this cycle when, what's very clear is from the start of this cycle, they wanted to take out the whole squad. That was their goal, $100 million to take out every member. And if, for those of us who follow, we saw that target list dwindle and dwindle over the few months when they realized they can't win these races. And there's nothing AIPAC hates more than admitting to an L, which is why, they don't. And so Summer Lee beat them. Rashida doesn't have an opponent. Ilhan is looking really good. And so now they're all in on Cori and Jamaal. And that's where we all have to be all in as well. Because absolutely, like you said, we've heard from so many members that other members have told them, we would say more on what's happening in Gaza and the genocide and call for a ceasefire, but we're too scared of an AIPAC primary. And, that's no way for our democracy or the Democratic Party to function, to operate from a position that we are too scared of a Republican-funded super PAC spending money against us in a Democratic primary. And so these wins are absolutely crucial, not just for progressives, but for everyone who doesn't want to see any politician, have their policies, have their interests be dictated by a dark money super PAC. And, AIPAC, there's always been a gap between Democratic voters and Democratic electeds. And I think we've seen that on this issue so deeply, where Democratic voters since November have overwhelmingly supported a ceasefire. They overwhelmingly support conditioning military funding to Israel. But AIPAC has turned that gap into a canyon. And it's up to us to bridge that gap and show Democratic electeds that they can reject AIPAC, they can reject AIPAC's endorsement and donations, and we can all stand up. It's really up to them, just to say, fuck it, we're not going to do this anymore, and take a stand if they're willing to have the backbone. And we're so proud at JD to have folks like Jamaal Bowman and Cori Bush and Summer Lee and others who have always had that backbone to stand up to AIPAC, who are unwilling to sell out these sort of corporate right-wing interests to represent the values and interests of their voters.
Before we get to how folks can help, whether they are in the district or outside of the district, let's just talk briefly about this poll. Poll came out. I can't remember who did it. As far as I can tell, it's a fairly reputable outfit. Who is it? Pix11. Oh, Pix11. Well, I don't know who they hired to do their polling, but Emerson. So, okay, fair. Not necessarily the best, but it showed Bowman down. I think it was 16 points. There's a 5-point margin of error, but also there's a question is like, who's going to show up? I mean, we just had a special election in Ohio, which was a seat that was dominated by Republicans. Somebody resigned. I can't remember his name. And Brown or so, Bill Johnson. And he won by 30 points. Usually the Democratic challenger came within 10 points. And this was someone who was running sort of part-time because there was no serious sort of mechanism behind him. So we don't really know who's coming out. Particularly, this isn't a special election. It's a primary. But there's nothing else really on the ballot. I mean, and it's not like people are coming out and there's a presidential primary that is going to drive a lot of people. Maybe some people coming out to leave the ballot blank or whatnot. So we don't really have a good sense of who's coming out. That's why some of these and this race has a dynamic of a guy who's coming in trying to reach low information voters, and he probably is with all these mailers, but they're not necessarily the high propensity voters. And my gut instinct is that the high propensity voters, they're coming out for Jamaal Bowman. And I don't know how you capture that in a poll, frankly. But what's your sense of of what that polling shows or doesn't show?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you said. And I think really what that poll shows is, what kind of effect $12 million in, a month has on Democratic voters, right? It leads to this sort of effect where they are given misinformation, they are sold lies, and they're confused about what's going on. If you look at kind of the crosstabs of those polls, there's a lot of confusing contradictions in there that shows clearly that what we need to be doing is educating these voters about what's at stake here, who's in this race. And I think the biggest thing to take out of that poll is the fact that there's still 21% of these voters are undecided. After spending $13 million in a primary, you have 21% of voters undecided. Just shows that they're not buying the lies and they're not willing to kind of believe what they're saying about Congressman Bowman because they know who Jamaal Bowman is because he's from this community. And so I think for us, it's all hands on deck at these doors to mobilize, as well as, getting as much money behind paid media and ads as we can, but especially at these doors, because this race is going to be about turnout. It's ensuring that the core base of the Democratic Party that has so often been left behind by the George Latimers of the world are mobilized by the Jamaal Bowmans of the world to actually vote in this primary and send a working class champion like Bowman back to Congress.
How crappy of a product do you have to be that $12 million later, you still have that many sort of unconvinced people? I mean, because those are like, if you get 21%, I don't know, on something like this, that means that they theoretically are gettable, and they're probably low information type of voters on some level, and $12 million, you still haven't swayed them. So, okay, what's Justice Democrats doing? What are other outfits that are doing canvassing? How can people who are listening, if they're out of district, if they're across the country, how can they help? If they're within the New York area or within district, how can they help?
Yeah, absolutely. There's all of us, Justice Democrats, Working Families Party, Jewish Vote, Sunrise Movement, if not now, Jewish Voice for Peace Action. Everyone is out here kind of getting together in this final stretch to support Bowman to get reelected. And so everyone can go to bowmanforcongress.com and go to the volunteer page, and there's mobilized links available for weekly phone banks, weekly canvassing, That's what we need right now, is bodies at the doors and on the phones to kind of get this message out, and also to donate to the campaign to ensure that we can continue to get the message out from the campaign side as well. So those are the two biggest things. It's really just signing up for a phone bank shift, signing up to canvass if you're in the district or coming into the district to do that, and getting this message out that, you know, Republican mega donors are trying to buy this seat, and Jamaal Bowman is willing to stand up to them. That's why they're doing that. And so that's the full story here. And it's up to our movement and every single one of us to kind of come together to ensure that we re-elect Jamaal. All
right. Well, we'll put links to that. And just a reminder, if you're out of district, if you're out of state, calling in, still very valuable. One-to-one conversation with people has been shown through studies to be much more effective than even an ad during the Yankees game or, 47 mailers in your mailbox. And particularly with a guy like Latimer, I mean, honestly, it's Joe Manchin times 2 with this guy. I mean, I don't remember Joe Manchin being so explicit about his racism. It's just unbelievable to me.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's what voters are seeing. That large section of undecided voters is seeing that these attack ads are funded by Republicans, and are seeing that George Latimer is just a bad person. He does not care about the voters in this district. He's deeply racist. He has nearly $10 million in assets. And so it's no surprise that he doesn't want to raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires. And so he is clearly not representing or running to represent the interests or needs of the people in this district. And I think people are wising up to that after a long time in service for this career politician.
Usamah Andrabi, Communications Director, is spokesperson for Justice Democrats. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Again, we'll put those links in the podcast and YouTube description and at majority.fm. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.